We saw the insects with genes that were resistant made up more of the next generation. Looking at the genetics of individuals will give us a close-up look at how populations change. The first requirement of natural selection is that the population has varied traits already. Natural selection cannot create variation. Often it does the opposite. Natural selection will make advantageous traits more common and actually decreases diversity. But we know that having diversity is a good thing. So one type of diversity is genetic diversity. This is the difference in the sequences of DNA from person to person. If you look at the other students in class around you, everyone looks slightly different. This is because we all have different genes, and then we make different proteins, and those express themselves in different ways. In order for natural selection to work, we must have genetic variation. So there are two ways that we increase variation in a population: sexual reproduction and mutations. Sexual reproduction includes two individuals who mate to produce a genetically unique offspring. If you compare yourself with your siblings or parents, you can see the genetic diversity. You likely share some traits with the other people in your family, but not all of them. You are a mix of the traits your parents have. You may even express traits that neither parent has. Sexual reproduction helps to diversify the population by passing on different combinations of traits to each individual. However, it can only pass on genes that already exist. So the only way to make new genes is through mutations. Mutations are random changes that happen to the DNA when we make new cells. If those new cells happen to be a sperm or an egg cell, and then those mutated genes could be passed on to the next generation. A mutation is just random, which means it is not inherently good or bad. The outcome of a mutation depends on how it affects the individual. So if a mutation helps an individual survive in that particular environment, then it's beneficial and will be selected for. Eventually becomes more common. If a mutation is harmful to an individual, it will be selected against and eventually become less common. Some mutations are actually considered neutral because they have no effect on the individual's survival. These types of mutations are typically not affected by natural selection. So we can use these so-called neutral mutations as evidence of evolutionary relationships. They help geneticists show when individuals are closely or distantly related. Even though individual organisms are subject to natural selection, individuals cannot evolve. Populations are the smallest unit of organization that can change over time. Think about it like this. So giraffes live in an environment where food is up high, so having a long neck is an advantageous trait. If a giraffe was born with a short neck, it would not be able to reach. This means it can't reach its food. The short-necked giraffe would not be able to try really hard to stretch out their neck. They wouldn't be able to do this any more than you could try really hard to change how your genes are and organized. Ultimately, the giraffes with the longer necks survive because they can reach the food, and the giraffes with shorter necks would die. So the longer-necked giraffes are able to feed, and they're able to survive and have babies. And because neck length is genetic, those long-necked giraffes are going to have long-necked giraffe babies. The short-necked giraffes would not survive, and then eventually there would be no short-necked giraffes left in the population. The gene pool of a population is every allele of every individual. An allele is just a gene that can code for different traits. If you look at the picture of butterflies, you can see that there are alleles that code for brown. They have a big A and a big A. There are alleles that code for orange. There's one big A, one little a. And there are alleles that code for white. You can see they both have little a, little a. The gene pool may change over time if one of these colors is better suited to the environment than the others. If the gene pool changes, perhaps the orange butterflies survive better and become more abundant. Then the population has changed. It has evolved. When we study evolution at this scale, it is typically called microevolution. There are small changes to the gene pool that we can observe over short periods of time. One of the best ways to study how evolution works is to look at the requirements for a population to not evolve. A frequency is how many of there are of something or its abundance. Two scientists in 1908 developed 5 requirements and an equation to help determine if a population was evolving. If the population is not evolving, it is said to be in Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. Now, we're not going to go into all of the math that goes along with this equation in this class. I want you to focus on the 5 requirements for a population to be in Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium, and therefore not changing. The first requirement is that the population should be very large. So you can see that in this picture of frogs, where there are a lot of frogs. This means that as alleles fluctuate due to random chance, the population is smaller. A population that is smaller is likely to be more affected by any random fluctuations. So if I have a population of 10 frogs, and I see one individual that randomly fluctuates, that's a 10% change. But if I have a population of 10,000 frogs, and only one individual sees that random fluctuation, then it's only a 0.01% change. The smaller change won't have as large of an effect on that population. The second requirement is that there is no gene flow. This means that there is no migration. So no individuals are going to enter or leave any population. In picture number 3, you can see that we have not spiky frogs on one side and spiky frogs on the other. Gene flow would allow them to move back and forth. But because there is no gene flow, they're separated and they cannot mix. Number 3 is no mutations. So this assumes that no mutation errors are made at all, or that the mutations are fixed and don't end up being passed on. So mutations directly change the gene pool. Any mutation could be evidence of evolution. Random mating. That's number 5, picture down here. This means that every individual of the opposite sex is just as likely to be chosen as a mate. There's no picking mates based on location, good looks, or other preferences. All individuals have the same chance of becoming mates and ultimately parents. Number 5 is no natural selection. So no natural selection, what this really means is that none of the physical traits are any better than any other. So if all traits are equal, then natural selection can't select for or against any of the traits. You may be thinking that the chance of any population meeting all of those requirements and actually being in Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium is just never going to happen. Well, you're probably right. Most populations are evolving, but using the Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium gives us a chance to look at these changing alleles over time.